Ladies and gentlemen, welcome wrestling fans worldwide to Knoxville and the Great Smoky Mountains for the Ron Fuller, Tennessee Studcast.
6 feet 9 inches tall, 265 pounds.
This historic podcast from one of the most respected and successful wrestlers and promoters will follow the footsteps of the largest and oldest wrestling family on the planet.
Listen to what I'm saying. That's right. Bring that camera in here a little bit closer.
Through 93 years and 4 generations.
The stud has arrived.
Old school or new fan, this unique broadcast will educate and captivate as Ron details decades of professional wrestling's growth with truly unforgettable stories.
I want those people out there at home to hear the stud.
Sit back and enjoy the ride with the Tennessee Stud.
The Tennessee Stud. You will learn that name. You will remember it.
And now,
the stud is here.
Ron Fuller, get in the ring. The spotlight is on you, my friend. Welcome back for another week.
Oh, thank you very much, Tony. So glad to be here. I'm really looking forward to it. We're going to cover a lot of ground. We're going to move from one side of the country to the other again today. We're going to talk a little farming, and we're going to talk a lot of wrestling. I look forward to it. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's a real honor. And it's a very humbling experience to look at numbers now. That's what happens when you're in this type of business, is they start laying those numbers out in front of you every week. It's hard to keep your head where it ought to be because you see those things and you go, my gosh almighty. But it's a testament to what we do here, Tony. I think obviously there are tremendous number of people out there that want the story and they want to find out the history of this sport. Find out from someone who lived it his whole life, 93 years and 4 generations. There's no family bigger, no family got more people involved in it than we did, and it's a pleasure to tell the tale.
Stud, I was talking with a guy who's a big wheel in this business. I'm not going to reveal his name, but he's huge in social media. He's huge in the podcasting world, and he reached out to me because I don't keep track of this stuff. I do a local radio show. I just do my thing. I'm kind of a hippie in this business. I always have been. I'm non-numerical. I just do my thing, and I've been blessed enough to be able to still be in business all these years later. He said, I don't know whether you realize it or not. He said, but you guys on the Studcast are doing incredible, unheard of almost, numbers for not being with one of these huge companies, not being with an MLW, not being with some of the other folks, the Podcast One, CBS's umbrella, he was talking about them, or an iHeartMedia. He said, you guys are swinging toe-to-toe. Did you know that? And I said, well, no, not really. Ron's a guy that gets into the numbers, but Ron, I'm starting to grasp the gravity here of what's going on. And it's pretty amazing because we're doing this out of a studio in Knoxville, Tennessee. We're throwing it up online. We didn't know whether there'd be a market for this. It's incredible, man.
It's kind of like, I'm very accustomed to this. Almost every business I ever got into, when I started my first wrestling promotion, I had no idea what to expect. Hopefully I wanted to be a success, and I thought I could be, but you don't ever know. When I went into hockey, gosh, I had more naysayers than anything I ever saw in my life. All of them said, you can't do it. It'll never happen. They said, you'll never draw 500. We drew 5,000. When they said, you'll never draw 150, we drew 10,000 for 32 games in Cincinnati in a row. Unheard of numbers. Went into ADT business, 1,200 dealers in America. They said, you'll never get to the top 100. I got to number 12 in 3 years. Unheard of. A number 12 dealer in North America. Not just America, in North America.
The power of the Studcast, as I'm getting the vibe here, is you. It's not Ron. He tells great stories. He does. And I'm okay at what I do. But the bottom line is, you have to decide to be our feet, to be our street team, to spread the word, to care enough about what we're doing, to go up to one of your friends that you know probably right now doesn't watch wrestling. Why? Because it sucks. Because Vince McMahon has sucked the life out of it. We're bringing it back to life here. We are celebrating something that we all have a commonality that we all share. And here's the thing about, and look, I'm not from Tennessee where I'm originally from the Philadelphia area. I grew up on the old WWWF product when it was actually presented to you so as not to insult your intelligence before Junior got a hold of it. Well, I grew up on that product. But one thing became readily apparent to me, and I've never shared this with Ron, but when I came down here, it was 87, and I would turn the television on, and I saw a different form of wrestling than I had ever seen before in his Continental program. We haven't even gotten to those years. We have got so much here to cover on the Studcast. But here's the fact. As I talk to people, for instance, a guy whose name recently came up on a Studcast, Ron Wright, recently passed away here. The mayor of the town where I'm at called me. Can I come on the show and say a few words? Tim Burchett himself. Can I say a few words about the passing of Ron Wright? We dropped everything, Stud. We dropped everything that day that we were talking about on my show. And that's the power of this era that you lived through, that you were a part of.
Oh, it was a great period. And that guy is truly a character. And if anybody deserves it, he really deserved it. He spoke for Tennessee, East Tennessee wrestling, a legend. And his brother Don, the two of them, tremendous tag team. He was a tremendous character. And I can't wait. I want to tell Ron Wright stories. I've told them on a couple of podcasts for other programs, just a little tease, but I have some absolutely outrageous Ron Wright stories. Maybe 3 episodes straight I could do on Ron Wright alone. And I love doing him. He's that redneck boy. He's down there. I'm going to put you a Tennessee dog whooping on you. You know, he's that guy that just everybody hated, and they loved to hate him. It was part of that era. It was part of that era that I was lucky enough to be a part of. It ended when by the time my career ended. There'll never be another era like that in history again, of the history of this sport. Never will it come back to the place that it was back in the 80s. Tremendous place to be, tremendous time to be a wrestler, tremendous time to be a fan, because there was so much good stuff out there. It's really cooking business at that time.
And here's what we're not going to do on here. We're not going to mourn the loss of wrestling. What we are going to do is celebrate it. And that's what we will do every single time we get together here on the Studcast. I do want to encourage you to check out TennesseeStud.com online if you haven't already. Join the Facebook page, Ron Fuller, Tennessee Stud, if you haven't already. Again, the webpage is tnstud.com. You'll see photos there. You'll see backstories, links, things like that of episodes when we're discussing things. Also on Instagram or Twitter. Ron is a great follow at Ron Fuller Welch as well. And Stud, it's about time to get into the meat of the matter here. Take it away.
Yes, it is. I think I want to go back, Tony. I want to finish Mississippi. I want to finish Potts Camp, Mississippi. If you didn't listen to the last episode, this place is so far back in the sticks, they pipe in sunshine every day. You can't find it. It ain't even on the map where we used to live. It's a 2,000-acre farm. Some of it it's off the delta of Mississippi River, in which some of the greatest soil in the world is deposited there by the Mississippi River as it flows south from St. Louis and above St. Louis on to the Gulf, New Orleans. And it deposits this silty black soil everywhere within 50, 60 miles of that river. When it overflows, as it does quite a bit, it leaves that soil there. So we're farming in an area of tremendous soil. Tremendous crops grow. We grew corn so tall that I was about 6'3" in the 9th grade, and I could not reach the lowest ears on a stalk of corn. The corn stalks were some of them 12 feet tall, as I estimated them. You'd have to cut them down to really see how tall they really were. You'd have to break them down to be able to pull the corn ears off the stalk. It was great corn. It was cotton that grew to be 7 feet tall. You could get lost standing straight up in a cotton field. They couldn't see you in there because the stalks were so high and the cotton was so high. Everything you grew in that part of the country was just wonderful. The crops were phenomenal. It was a big farm that had been sharecropped for many, many years. And the way sharecropping worked back in the day, as best I can understand it, because it was before my time. You had a big farm like that, and this is before tractors became prevalent, and you were plowing with horses and mules. You couldn't plow a whole lot, and you could not cultivate much land because you just couldn't get it done with just a horse and a plow. So you put people that couldn't afford to buy a farm on your land. You built them a small house, and you gave them the rights to farm your land. At the end of the year, they gave you a certain part of whatever they cultivated at the end, or whatever they picked at the end, or whatever the crop was that they were growing. This farm had probably 10 to 15 sharecropper homes on it, and people still lived on them. Now, in this day and time that we were there in 1963, I was a freshman in high school. These people didn't farm. A lot of them did not farm anymore. They were very, very poor people, and Dad never charged people rent, even if they didn't farm. They didn't sharecrop. If they wanted to grow a crop, he let them keep everything because he didn't feel like he deserved any part of it. We had so much land as it was anyway. And what he would do, Dad, different than Roy, but hearkening back to my grandfather, Roy was such a tough, posing individual. Dad was very generous with people. He would take these people I remember on Christmases that we would buy Christmas presents, not for ourselves. We didn't have very big Christmas ourselves. We would buy all types of presents, and we would go to these sharecropper homes on the farm, and we would give those kids and those moms and dads their Christmas presents. We would bring Christmas like Santa Claus would. It was one of the most wonderful feelings I ever got as a child, as a 15-year-old, a 16, 14, 15-year-old, being a part of that and seeing those faces on those people when you pulled up there and you started bringing out those bags and those wrapped up packages. It was a great feeling that you got. I never forget it. I always appreciated my dad immensely for his ability to do that. And he was crazy. When he used to wrestle, and even later as years went on, he would pick up guys on the side of the road, hitchhikers. He would bring them home. Mom would be cooking for him. He'd get home at 2 or 3 in the morning, and she would get out of bed and she would cook for him, and he would show up with a guy with him. He didn't know the guy's name. They would talk. Wherever he picked him up, he would bring him home. We would feed him. He would put him in one of our beds. And the next morning, if it was cold, I've seen him take his coat off and put it on the guy's back and take him down to the highway and put him on the road again. He was just a really generous and good person. This farm had next to it, and this is one of the stories I like to tell because it's different. It's not a wrestling story, but it has a wrestler mentality to it, let's call it. There's a farm next to us that raises hogs. The guy's a big guy. He probably weighs 300 pounds. He's lived there for 30 years. We buy the farm next to him, and he lets his hogs have free reign of wherever they want to go. So his hogs, they come home at night to his farm, and during the day, they just separate and they go all different directions, and they eat everybody's crops around them. When you planted corn, you would come the next day or a week later when the corn's up about 4 inches, and you would see 50 hogs in your field eating them, walking down the road, eating each little tiny stalk. In other words, all the work you've done is totally gone. And we had a boxer that we did not know how tough the boxer was, but the first time we ever encountered a farm field in which it was full of hogs, we were standing up on a hill, and the boxer just took off running down the hill. And my dad screamed at him like, "Hey, come here," and he just went on. First hog he got to, he grabbed him by the ear, and the hog started squealing, and Dad was upset anyway that these are not his hogs. It had been our hogs eating our corn, been one thing, but it's some other guy's hogs eating the corn. So we got upset. We saw that the dog had the ability to catch a hog, so Dad and I rode over to this guy's farm. And he knocked on his door. Guy came out of his house. He's a big guy. He probably weighs 300 pounds. He's 6'4", something like that. Dad's 6'2". He weighs about 230. And Dad says, "Listen," he goes, "your hogs, I caught your hogs, some of your hogs that day. This morning I saw eating my corn, and I live over here at such and such, not that far away from you." And the guy goes, "Yeah, it's probably my hogs." And he goes, "Well, why is it that you don't have a fence here? I see you don't have any fence around your property here, and you raising hogs. Why is it that you're not feeding your own hogs your stuff?" And he says, "Well, I've been here a long time, and I kind of do what I want to here." And he goes, "You're going to have to expect that my hogs are going to eat whatever they want to on your property, and you're just going to have to live with it." So Dad didn't take too kindly to that. He says, "You don't know anything about me," but he goes, "I can tell you right now that your hogs are going to be caught on my property. I'm going to catch your hogs, and I'm going to sell them." And the guy goes, "Now, wait a minute. You're saying that if you catch my hogs on your farm, that you're going to take them to sale in some other city?" He says, "Yeah, I'll truck them to Memphis if I have to, and I'm going to sell your hogs until you put a fence up." And the guy says, "Wait a minute." He goes, "I don't build fences." He says, "I don't take this kind of stuff from anybody, and we're going to see about what you're able to do." So Dad says, "Okay, we'll see." So we drive out of there, and I asked him, I said, "What are you going to do?" And he says, "We're going to catch this guy's hogs." "And then what are you going to do with it?" He said, "We're going to sell the sons of guns." So that's what he do. Next day, we go out in the same field we saw the day before, and there's the hogs. They're eating the rest of the corn in that field, and he sicks that boxer on one. So he gives us big hand of baling wire. And so what are we going to do? "Just follow me," he says. So the dog goes down the hill, and he grabs one of those hogs by the ear. Big old hog, probably weighs 400 pounds. And the hog is just squealing like crazy, standing there just shivering and shaking. The dog's got him by the ear. Dad just took his baling wire and wrapped it around the hog's back legs and said, "Let him go. Get another one." And the dog went to the next hog, the next one, the next one, the next one. By the time we finished there in that field, there was probably 25 hogs laying on the ground with their legs tied behind them. And he said, "Go get the truck." So we got the truck. We reached and grabbed those big old hogs, me, Rob, and him, and we loaded them on that truck. And we trucked them suckers to Memphis. That was the first time we took a truckload out. We just kept doing it. Finally, the guy sends a message by a friend of his. The guy comes up to Dad on the farm, and he says, "Listen," he goes, the guy's name was Underwood, it seems like. He says, "Mr. Underwood over there's getting pretty upset with you. He seems like he's missing a bunch of hogs." And Dad said, "Well, I'm not surprised. We see his hogs over here, and, we catch them. And the guy says, "Well, he's very perturbed, and he's mean. He's beat up a whole lot of people." And Dad says, "Well, tell him that we got his hogs. And if he wants to come over here and beat me up, he knows where I live." So the guy goes driving off. So we continue. This process goes on for 3 months. Now we go over, finally, the guys sent messages by 5 different people. "I'm going to kill your dog. I know what you're doing. I'm going to shoot that boxer." And he's threatening all these things. So Dad and me drive back over to his farm. This is 3 months later. Now, this guy probably had, I don't know, I guess he had 1,000 hogs at one time. And we drive up on his property. He's got a fence that's 20 feet high, that's 100 yards in all directions. He's got 14 little pigs in there. We knock on his door, just like the first time Dad met him. He comes out of the door, and he goes, "Oh, it's you." And Dad says, yeah. And the guy goes, you says, look at my hog farm. And Dad says, is that your hogs? And he's got 14. They used to call them shoats. They were little bitty pigs. They were maybe about a foot high and about 12 inches long, little young pigs. The guy says, yeah. He goes, that's all I got left. He goes, you've done sold all my hogs. And Dad says, well, if you're still upset about it, he says, you might as well open that gate and let them out. He says, I'll get them for you too. And the guy goes, no way. He goes, I ain't never opened my gates no more. He goes, nobody's going to have to deal with Underwood hogs anymore. He says, you just about put me out of the hog business. And he said, I guess we won't have to worry about your hogs anymore. So that was kind of his way of handling it. We went ahead and trucked the boys' hogs to Memphis and sold his hogs until he built himself a big, huge fence. And now he's raising, I don't know if he's still there. He may still be there. It's just a concept of what the old man was all about. I was really kind of looking forward to seeing the guy get physical, because I think Dad would have liked that too. As it was, I think he'd heard that, this guy used to be a wrestler or whatever it is, and he knew to leave him alone.
Probably a smart decision on the part of the farmer, of the hog farmer. You ever see your dad whip somebody? Civilians? We talk about your dad with wrestlers and people didn't respect the business. Did you ever see your dad get physical with somebody outside of that context?
I never saw him actually have to do it. He was kind of like Roy. He kind of got it done without having to take it to that extreme. I saw him, I think I told already, in Memphis one time, pick up a guy that was wearing a suit that was flirting with my mom and being a real jerk. I even noticed the guy flirting, and Dad picked him up and set him in his steak on his plate and made him sit there until we finished eating and left before he would let him get up out of his steak. So I saw him handle things. I saw him do the old Roy choke routine, the way Roy started his territory, sticking that thumb in their larynx and jamming it in there and whispering in their ear. I saw that routine. I've seen him show people moves. I remember one time being in a barbershop, same area, and the barber there was a guy in there that didn't believe wrestling was real, and he kept making little smart remarks while Dad's getting his hair cut. And when Dad got finished, I knew he was going to be upset. And the guy had made fun. He said, that abdominal stretch. He picked that one move, the abdominal stretch, that Lester Welch, he's related to you. He uses that a lot. He says, that ain't that can't hurt anybody. So the guy had a hat on, and Dad just got out of the chair. The guy says that to him, and Dad just reaches in there. He hooks a grapevine on his left leg. He reaches around behind his head and then gets his own hand, and he cranks the guy. He backs up close to the wall and leans against the wall, so he's got plenty of leverage. He don't have to worry about falling down. And he cranked the guy. The guy's hat came off. He smushed it. He got it between his wrist and his face so that he smushed the guy's hat in his face while he's cranking him. Now, the barbershop's full of people. Guys are all waiting to get their hair cut. Now, they've listened to all this stuff for 30 minutes. And when Dad does this and he grabs him and he does that to him, the guy screamed. You could hear him for 3 miles. Screamed like crazy. Dad let him go. He went down on his face in the barbershop floor. He had his hat still over his face. Now his hat's smashed underneath his face, and the whole place is roaring and laughing like, wow, my God, they're patting Dad on the back, going out, so, boy, you guys, y'all wrestlers really are tough. So, I've seen all kinds of little examples. Dad had a cauliflower ear. He used to like to mess with waitresses. He would go into restaurants and people notice your cauliflower ears because they're very unusual, and the waitresses would go, you'd see him looking, he'd see him looking at his ear, and he'd go, you ever seen one of those? And they go, what is that? What happened to your ear? And he goes, it's cauliflower. He said, you want to touch it? It was always funny. They would back off real quick like, well, no, I don't want to touch it, but then they'd want to touch it. So they would start to reach for his ear, and when they got real close to his ear, he'd turn his head and he'd pop his teeth and go, wow, like he's going to eat their finger off. Oh, there was a big laugh. They'd all run backwards, and everybody around would see the deal. So he had a good sense of humor about doing that type of stuff. He had a way about him that when he got angry, people seem to know it, and they just seem to realize they got a vibe off of him like, this ain't somebody you want to mess with. So they back off pretty quickly.
Yeah, you're just in discussing him, I just thought, I don't hear you talk about him getting violent with people very much. I'd imagine, as we say, his reputation probably preceded him, and probably smart of many folks to not escalate, as the hog farmer chose not to.
Yes. And even wrestlers. It wasn't just with people, with guys that didn't know anything or didn't know he's a wrestler or whatever. Wrestlers had a lot of respect for him as well. He was very stiff in the ring. He was, a lot of guys hated to work with him because he was stiff. We're about to leave the farm here, and we're going to head another direction. But I want to set the groundwork for me personally. And now me and Rob, now we're in junior high, just starting early high school. I'm in the 9th grade. We're beginning to be a little more grown up. I'm in a school here in Mississippi in Potts Camp. As you could imagine, it's not a big school. It has 100 students in the entire high school. It's so small that you don't change classes. The teachers do. They just leave you in the same class, and the math teacher comes in, and then the history teacher comes in. It's just a real tiny little area. But there's a basketball coach there who is really a good coach. In the state of Mississippi, they have a state tournament that plays the big schools against the big schools, right down to the smaller schools, Class A, Class B, whatever it is, all the classification. And then when there's the most unusual tournament, when those teams win their championships of their class, then they put all the teams together in another tournament from the smallest school to the biggest school in the state, and they all play each other. This guy is a Potts Camp coach. And in 10 years he's been there, he's won 2 of those, not just his group size schools. He's won 2 state outright, beat the biggest schools with 100 kids. Now, this guy is the first basketball coach I ever have. I've been playing football most of the time as a young kid growing up. I'm really interested in football. I go to the school. They don't have football. They've got basketball and baseball. So I play catcher on baseball team, and I start to play a little basketball. This coach really takes an interest in me. He sees something in me. I'm only 6'2", 6'3", 9th grade, but he sees that there's some potential there. I don't even see it myself, but we start to move later on away from there, and he sits me down, and I say, Coach, I'm leaving. I'm going to another school. We're moving. And he says, look, we're going to Arizona. As a matter of fact, he says, son, he sits with a basketball sitting on the floor beside him. He picks it up. He throws it across the desk at me. I catch it. And he says, son, if you play with that ball right there, he says, you'll never have to pay for college. I'll never forget those words. 9th grade, wasn't very good. I didn't see it. I couldn't see that, but he saw the potential in me. And later on, his words were very prophetic, because I ended up getting that free scholarship. I'm getting that free education. So he's a sharp guy. He sees it. So we've spent this time on the farm. Quite a while now. We've been there for a year or more than a year. Dad has given up wrestling. He doesn't care about it anymore. He gets the call from the same guy in Tucson, Arizona, who is still out there, still trying to make it happen. And he fires Dad up to take this trip and for us to go back to Arizona. Dad sits us down. We're all farmers now. We want to stay. Me and Rob and my mom, we don't want to go. And he says, I don't want to go either. He says, but I'll tell you what we'll do. Let's go there for 3 months. He said, I'm going to light it up. I'm going to save $50,000 in 3 months. If we save $50,000, we'll come back here and we can farm forever. So he gets us all on board. We're all like, oh, boy, well, we don't want to go. So I leave that 100-student high school, and I go to Phoenix, okay? I go to a school called Camelback High School. It has 10,000 students. It is like a college campus. It's huge. So that frustrates me. Now, it could be, to me, it appears to be 10,000. It may be somewhat less than that, but it's nowhere near going to that small little school in Mississippi that I was accustomed to. And everything changes for us again. We're back in Arizona, and we are back into wrestling again. And Dad's 100% cranked to get us back to that farm in 3 to 6 months. And that's where our focus is at that point.
I'm looking up Camelback High School as you talk, and of course it's still there. And that looks like a rather gigantic school. So we're getting ready to go to Phoenix. Stud, do you want to get into the Phoenix part of this? And do we have wrestlers like Jose Lothario there, like you mentioned in our last time we got together, or Baby Blimp, Fargo and Dalton? Are those guys still there? Or do you want to get in some questions on the other side? It's up to you.
I'll tell you what, let's do our questions if we can, okay? And then what we'll do is we're going to find Phoenix in the next one. Let's find Phoenix. And what Dad does here in Phoenix is just like he did in Mobile, just like he did in Memphis. He goes back there and he takes that torch, man, and he lights up those wrestling fans. I don't think they'll ever reach the numbers that he drew in one crowd there. He has those monster crowds like he has become famous for. He builds a business that's solid, but he has that monster event that he finally hits them with. And when he gets that big crowd, he does the same thing he's done a lot in his career. He's going to lose interest. He's accomplished his goal. He's got there. He's seen the top. He's developed his business into a mega business, and he's ready to go somewhere else and do it again. So we'll get back to that next time. We want to do, I love these questions. Let's rock in them after the break. I guess you assume you want to take the break, Tony?
I'm going to let you throw to it, Stud. Tell him we'll come right back on the other side on the Studcast. Tell him, Stud.
We're going to come right back on the other side, just like Tony says.
This is Studcast number 15, featuring Stud stories as told by the legendary Ron Fuller, the Tennessee Stud, and hosted by Tony Basilio. This Studcast will continue in a moment. You are back, seated ringside on this edition of the Ron Fuller Studcast.
Tony Basilio back with you on your Studcast. And as advertised, the Tennessee Stud is now going to do something that we love doing, which is interact with you in a real and profound way. And here in episode 15, we're going to start things off with Jason Williard from Little Rock, Arkansas, who says the following. Growing up, I was a huge Bruiser Brody fan. When you guys wrestled, was he stiff or was he agile for a man his size? Also, you believe the guy belongs in the Hall of Fame? What do you have to say about that? Stud, Bruiser Brody, first part of that. When you guys wrestled, was he stiff or agile? How would you describe wrestling Bruiser Brody?
Let me go a little more into detail. Great question. I happen to know quite a bit about Bruiser Brody. 1983, I made a 3-week tour in Japan. I wrestled Bruiser Brody and Stan Hansen on several occasions during that Japanese tour. Wrestling in Japan is a unique thing to begin with. We'll go into it in the future because there's a whole show, at least maybe 2, just the mindset of the Japanese people. It's really phenomenal. But Bruiser Brody is, for people that don't know Bruiser Brody's about a 6'6" guy who weighs about 290 pounds, maybe 300 pounds. He's great shape, not fat, has abs that you can see, tremendous build, a killer attitude. When you wrestle in Japan, you can't go to wrestle in Japan thinking that it's going to be like wrestling in America, because it's not going to be. They don't do wrestling in Japan like we do in America. They are all stiff. It's not just Brody. It's not just Hansen. The Japanese themselves, that all goes back to the training that was done by Carl Gotch there. He was there. He was a legend. And I just saw a thing in the Tampa paper where Carl Gotch was memorialized in Japan, where it showed pictures of thousands of people came to see that his ashes in Japan. And he went in there and turned those Japanese into killers. They became very, very tough. So I got to tell part of this story. It's going to take me a couple of minutes here, but I think it's all going to paint the picture for Bruiser Brody. Me and Barry Windham are a team. We're wrestling the first night in Japan, in Osaka, Japan, against Bruiser Brody and Stan Hansen. You can't wrestle 2 guys any better than those 2 boys. And they're in Japan. It's opening night and it's on television. So when you go to the ring, you know that you're going to take a pounding tonight. It's going to be something really, really different. We watch in the dressing room door. It's my first encounter in Japan. I watch them come out of the dressing room. There must be 1,000 young Japanese guys, probably from 15 to 25 years old, that rushed the dressing room door. And I watch it, and I'm like, what is that all about? And when they open the door, Brody comes out with a logging chain. It's about 20 feet long. It's thick and big. Hansen has his rope, which he's just swinging at everybody that's close to him. And that forces some of those crowds back upon the guys behind them because they can't react fast enough. And then Brody takes that logging chain and he starts to swing it in a big circle around his head, and then he lowers it to the floor. And you can hear that chain hit the floor, and it starts taking the feet out from underneath, 40 of them. I mean, he leaves a trail of bodies. They start coming to the ring. By the time they get to the ring, they don't come up the aisle like everybody else does. They go through the middle of the ringside. It's the ringside. The building's sold out. They destroy it. The people are panicking. They're screaming. They're running. The chairs are flying. They haven't got to the ring yet, and there's pandemonium in the building. You look, and there's a line of bodies laying back toward the dressing room. So they get in the ring. Brody hits me with a chair probably 10 minutes into the match. I see it. Luckily, I see him coming with it. I bend over, and I push my back up, expecting the worst, and it was 10 times worse than I was expecting. He hit me so hard that it sounded like a shotgun went off in the building. And the fans went, ooh. About all you get out of the Japanese is a ooh. We got a real good ooh out of it. Later on in the match, I picked him up and shot him in the ropes. I drop kicked him. He's 6'6". I have a picture of it in my home. It's one of the prettiest drop kicks I ever threw in my life. I'm up at his level. My entire body is head high with Brody. Both my feet are in the side of his face. He's turned his face sideways. He's holding the rope to keep his balance because he doesn't want to go down. And that drop kick is just solidly pow. It was one of the best drop kicks I ever threw. He did not take a bump. I was like, oh my goodness, So Bruiser Brody was very stiff. The answer to your question is very stiff, and it wasn't just with me. When he worked with the Japanese, he was even stiffer, and Hansen might have been stiffer than Brody. So between the two of them, you were lucky to survive it. I got to be great friends with them. We traveled together a lot, and you had these long trips there. You would start out in the morning on a bus, and then you'd get on a plane, and then you'd get on a ferry, and then you'd get on a train, and you would get to the town 20 hours later. It was like travel was the nightmare, and you spent a lot of time with these guys. Brody and Hansen were great guys. Brody died in a horrible fashion in Puerto Rico. And when I heard about it, it really affected me. I really had a lot of respect for Bruiser Brody. And the second answer that I would give to it is absolutely, without a doubt, Bruiser Brody. If anybody in this sport ever belonged in the Hall of Fame, if they are remiss and they look over Bruiser Brody, what the hell is wrong with him? He is really was one hell of an athlete, one hell of a worker. He's one of those West Texas guys. He's the Terry Funks and the Dory Funks and the Dick Murdochs, just that whole group of guys that come out of that West Texas that were just tough individuals. Speaking of the two Funks, someday we'll get to them. There's 3 shows on the two Funk brothers, and can't wait to talk about some of these people. I really like this question because it puts me on some of those guys that we have not talked about. And Bruiser Brody, Hall of Famer. You damn right, in my opinion.
Yeah, and terrible the way that man died and the lack of justice there in Puerto Rico and what took place there. And that's been written about and talked about. Perhaps not enough when you get right down to it, because it remains an injustice. Jose Arguera, Corsicana, Texas. Who was your favorite partner to work with?
That's a good one. I've worked with great partners. I've been really lucky. Obviously, partners that aren't family members. Let's talk about some of those first. Bill Watts. Bill Watts is a tremendous athlete out of Oklahoma and a legitimate athlete, great worker. Eddie Graham. I wrestled some matches with Eddie Graham, who's a phenomenal worker. A lot of guys that aren't family members, but I have to say that when you have a family member, they've got that same blood in their veins that you have in yours, and the same fighting spirit and the same training, and you don't have to talk a lot in the ring. You learn to expect your partner is on the same page you are, and it's so easy to wrestle in tag matches in which you have a relative. I've had great tag matches with Jimmy Golden, my first cousin, wrestled with him many, many times. Jimmy is a tremendous athlete, Hall of Famer. You talk about Hall of Famer, there's one right there too, Jimmy Golden. But I'd have to say that in answer to the question, my brother and I, we wrestled. We started out in Georgia as a tag team because it's easy to wrestle in a tag team match, much easier when you're green than it is to wrestle in a single match. When you're in a single match, you can get lost, and you can also get your butt whipped pretty badly. In a tag match, it's an easier concept to cut your teeth in that tag match than it is to go out there as a single individual and wrestling by yourself. Rob and I had tremendous matches early on. We got to wrestle great competition. We started out wrestling the Assassins. We had a great run with the Assassins in Georgia as two green guys. That was Jody Hamilton and Tom Renesto, the original Assassins, one of the greatest teams of all time. They just led us like we were little sheep and had phenomenal matches. We've went on to win Southeastern Tag Championships, the Continental Tag Championships. We won the Georgia Championships, the Tag Championships, the Florida Tag Championships. We won Southern Tag Championships. We won all kinds of titles together. But we really wrestled most of our careers in the first 4 years as separate individuals. But whenever we got together, we had tremendous success because we had trained together, for one thing. We had a guy named Corsica Gene that trained us to actually work, and he was phenomenal. And so we had that training. We knew each other's thought processes, and there's just something about wrestling with a family member that you don't have to communicate. It's almost like you know what the other person is thinking, same time they're thinking. It's a big advantage. So I would have to say my brother, Robert Fuller.
You know, it's an incredible question because it opens up, again, so many doors as I look back through your history. I'm reading one account of your career which tells me that you teamed one time at least with Andre the Giant. Is that true? Did you tag with Andre the Giant in a match?
Oh, yes.
And what was that like working with Andre?
Oh, my. Well, you don't really have to do too much when you're in the ring with Andre, you know? I mean, when Andre goes in the ring, you can go to sleep over there in the corner if you want to because he's not going to need any help. You know, even if they both get in there, he's still going to be able to take care of business. And there again, you know, Tony, that's another individual. I just can't wait to get to Andre because Andre not just was a partner, Andre was a close personal friend of mine. I have more tremendous Andre stories. I have yet to tell the very first one of them, and I am chomping at the bit to get to it, but we're chronological here, and we're going to work our way in that direction. But when I get to Andre, we got an entire program of Andre, easily maybe two, about just Andre stories. Andre the Giant, he's a phenomenal individual, and he had that Ron, he talk like that. You know, he say, and Ron, I like beer. And he did like beer, and he liked to drink. I saw him drink 112 cans of beer in one night, and he was not drunk. You know, Andre could drink beyond any human I ever saw. I never saw him drunk the entire time I knew him.
A guy you certainly didn't want to anger, though, right?
Oh, gosh, no. I mean, gosh, it's like Roy's bear. You know, messing with him would be like messing with Roy's bear when he's got no muzzle on and no mittens on his claws. I mean, Andre, he's a scary figure. Standing next to Andre puts size in perspective in a way you just never see it. You look up at him and you look at his size, and it makes you, first time I ever saw him, I watched him walk through the door. He had the big afro. It was 1973 in Florida. He was followed by his interpreter. He bent. It was a 7-foot door, a 6'8" door. He bent at the waist to get his hair and his head through that door, and turned a little bit sideways because his shoulders were wider than the door. I'd never seen him before, and there was several of us in that dressing room that night that had never seen him. And talk about making a first impression. That is what I call a first impression, that big afro he had and that immense size. It's phenomenal what Andre looked like.
Well, and what's interesting, too, when you start talking about Andre the Giant, there are really two of them. There's the one that when Vince McMahon took over for his father, the Andre that we all saw on the national stage. And then there's the Andre you interacted with, who was the complete freak of nature Andre, who could do things in a ring that a big man, a guy his size, never should have been able to do. I mean, his agility, for a guy his size to be as agile as he was, what an athlete. What an incredible athlete.
He was a great athlete. In France, he was a soccer player. Now, you imagine that. You just think of Andre running down a soccer field and kicking a ball. You know, every time I have a thought of that, I imagine him kicking the air out of a ball, busting one when he falls off and kicks that sucker. He could probably kick it at 90 yards. He's a great guy. And the greatest part of Andre was what his sweet and kind and polite nature. You would expect him to be a brutish type of guy. He was the most polite and cordial individual that I've ever seen. He was a rare person in more ways than one.
I can't wait to get to those stories. That's going to be incredible, reliving that through your eyes. But moving along, question number 3 here. On our Studcast, we take your questions for the great Ron Fuller. Gene Jackson, Coleman, Alabama. What did you find to be the pros and cons of wrestling under a hood?
Great question. I really enjoyed wrestling under a hood, and there are pros and cons to it. The biggest pro to wrestling under a hood is when you wrestle under a hood, your opponent has no idea of where your head is. Sometimes when you're not wearing a mask, he can see pain, he can see fear, he can see things in your facial expressions that give him an advantage sometimes. He can tell when a hold is really hurting you, and he knows to apply more pressure. There are things that you can see in a man's face that telegraph what his feelings are in his body. And when you put that mask on, they lose that ability right there. As soon as that mask goes on, they can only see the eyes and lips. I used to wear the chinless mask because I didn't like the mask that fit tight over your chin because it had a small hole over the mouth. When you get blown up, you got to have air. I always wanted to have no constraints when it came to sucking oxygen because toward the end of matches, you needed as much of that as you could get your hands on. So you had that chinless mask I like to wear, and they could not see my face. They did not know what was going on in my head nor in my body. I was not getting secrets by them being able to look at my face. So wearing a mask hides a whole lot of things. It takes a while to get used to because it's very confining. You can't see like you can with peripheral vision. You can't see a guy coming from an extreme angle that you could maybe see without the mask on. But I really enjoyed wrestling with the mask on. I did it for probably the last 7 years of my wrestling career. I probably spent most of that time wrestling underneath the hood, and I enjoyed it very much. I think it was an advantage for me to wrestle under the hood.
How do you keep that from burning your face up? You get in a building, it's really hot, and you get those abrasions, and it's rubbing against you, and it just seems like that would be a recipe to just... And everybody's face is so sensitive to begin with.
You know, I used to have my mask special made, and I'm trying to get those for my stud store. As a matter of fact, from the same company that made my mask for me. And they were very thin. They weren't made out of a cottony type material. They were made of more of a silky material so that the mask itself didn't scratch you. It was softer to the touch and softer to the face. It still had some strength, so if someone wanted to tear your mask, they had a real hard time doing it. It had had a hard time pulling it off as well. And I enjoyed working. Once I found that particular type of mask, it was like your wrestling shoes. Wrestling shoes in particular were so important to you that once you found wrestling shoes that you really like, you stayed with that company for the rest of your life. When I went to Australia in 1973, I found a guy that made me my first pair of Kangaroo wrestling boots. I took him my wrestling shoes and showed it to him, and he said, "Mate," he goes, "I can make them for you in Kangaroo." And I said, "How tough is that?" And he goes, "The roo skin is tougher than your cowhide, mate." So he gives me the story. He measured my foot with a tape measure. He measured my instep. He measured the center of my foot. He measured my ankle. When I put those boots on, they were absolutely unbelievable. I had painted on the insides and the outsides of them. I had the color blue that matched my tights. Everybody either had black boots or white boots. I was the first one to come with color on my wrestling shoes. I came back from Australia. I took my boots out of my wrestling bag and set them on the floor. I had 10 guys in the dressing room, came straight to him. They went, "Wow, where the hell did you get those?" And I told them about the guy in Australia. That I gave out some cards. They started getting boots made by him. You just get accustomed to some things you want to have made by the people that you really can depend on, and something that's quality. Those Kangaroo boots lasted me 4 years. They were unbelievable.
Love it. Love craftsmanship. Stud on the way out. Who's the winner here in episode 15 in our Ask the Stud segment?
I think I'm going to take that Jason Williard, the Arkansas, the Little Rock person with the Bruiser Brody question. I think Bruiser is a great buddy of mine, or was a great buddy of mine, and a great campaigner for the sport of wrestling. Did phenomenal business wherever he went. I hope you enjoy that, my man out there in Little Rock, and we'll be getting that photo to you. And thank you very much for that question. It's a great one.
I'm starting to think this whole thing was a work, this episode. Would you like to know why?
Yeah. What's the deal?
Because a guy from Arkansas wins, and you talked all about the Hogs. You called the Hogs in the first part of this episode. And now we're doing some pig suey on the back end.
Only you'd come up with that.
Come on, Stud.
You got to really
where do you
dig
think
deep.
I was born?
Think like you, man. You got to really dig deep to thinking like that. But it is a kind of coincidence, isn't it? We had a hog story, and we're going to end up with a winner being a hog guy. So I got to say for those folks out there in Arkansas, woo pig. Let's take them on. Let's see what they do out there. Where's it? Fayetteville, right?
Fayetteville. Yep.
There you go.
Actually, he's in Little Rock. So, Jason, it's
that's
okay.
That's where the team is, though. That's where the old Hogs play, though, right? Fayetteville, Arkansas, I believe it is. So, woo pig for you Arkansas fans.
Yeah, and they still play, and they still get it done in Little Rock as well. Hey, Stud, on the way out, we do want to remind folks one more time that you are to be found online if you can. Tell them about the website, the Facebook, and other places where they can reach you.
You can find us. The website is tnstud.com. The Facebook page is Ron Fuller, Tennessee Stud. That's Tennessee spelled out, the entire state spelled out. And if you want to hook up with me or follow me on Twitter or Instagram, it's Ron Fuller Welch. And be sure and check us out on the iTunes and the Stitcher and Google Play and Podcast Addict. Vanguard's got us everywhere, Tony. They are treating us, like you said in the beginning of the we're produced by the major companies. We are probably the biggest independent thing going out there anywhere in the world right now. And I'm so proud of what we are accomplishing here. I'm so humbled by the people that are supporting us and the talk everywhere about us. It's just really, really phenomenal. I thought I might, do fairly good at this. I had a feeling that I had a lot of stories in me, and I certainly have a history behind me. But I had no idea that we'd be able to do something like what is happening across the world, the wrestling world. If you're a wrestling podcast fan, we're just about a must listen to. If you don't listen to us, then you may be missing the boat, because what we do here, Tony, is unique. I've listened to a lot of podcasts, and nobody does what we do.
There's no question about that, and it's such sweet irony that Brian Last and his Arcadian Vanguard would reach out to you and say, hey, I want to help bring what you guys are doing to the next level, get you in front of more people, because his 605 podcast, which you've appeared on a few times, is such a great show, celebrates the sport, makes you laugh, makes you think. And then there's Jim Cornette's program, who you're also affiliated with. Again, a guy that just burns so passionately for the business and has such a great love for the sport of wrestling and its fans. And we don't talk down to people. We don't consider people marks here. We love you. We appreciate you. And that's kind of what I try to do, Stud, with my daily show every day over at TonyBasilio.com. I have a blog up every day, serving the common fan. We do a post-game show after Tennessee football games. If you want to turn that on after a Tennessee loss, and you'll hear what a real shoot sounds like, because it is faux real. Also, Sunday nights, we do a program that we call Southeastern Sunday from 7 to 9 Eastern across several platforms, and including on my streaming site over at TonyBasilio.com on my website. So, Stud, sounds like we're about done here, man. It's 15 weeks, brother. Time flies and you're having fun.
Yes, sir. It certainly does. I'd like to remind fans one more time, Stud Store. I mean, we're really stocking it up. We've got a lot of different things out there. We're offering, if you missed those first 5 Studcasts, we're going to do it for people in a CD. You can pick up all 5 of those with one CD. It makes a great gift if you've got grandpa or grandma or somebody that's not computer literate that wants to have a memento of these things to keep forever. Those things are out there and available. We're trying to accommodate the many thousands of fans that we're creating, and everything is Studcast oriented. It's not so much Ron Fuller, it's kind of Studcast oriented. And it's just a pleasure, Tony. It's wow. It's a great ride every week. And looking at those numbers, I hearken to them every once in a while now because I cannot ignore them. It thrills me. It makes me feel like, geez, Ron, you're doing something your granddaddy would have been so proud of and your daddy would have been so proud of. And we're about to finish up here shortly with my dad, and we're going to get to my generation, me and Rob and Jimmy and all of us. The story is still yet to be told. We're going to be here a long time in telling this, and we keep getting the support. Tell your friends. Tell your neighbors about us. Make sure they tune in. Have them listen one time. They're going to come back to you and say, thank you so much for telling me about that. And that's what's going to make it grow for us. And it's going to make it so we're creating history here. We're not just telling it. I think we're really creating some history, Tony.
Wow, it's a great way of looking at that. And Ron Fuller, thank you for being with us. It's been awesome, man. Thanks for letting me do this with you.
Oh, man, it's my pleasure. I couldn't have had a better guy to do it with, Tony. I think we make a pretty good team together. I just love working with you. You got those quick fingers, and you're always checking my facts, man. You're keeping me honest as you can be, and you're checking that Google, man, to
Easy
see that
killer.
I'm not making some of this stuff up. So it's good. I like it.
Stud, I really do appreciate you, and thanks again for having me in. And it is hard to believe, but episode 15, we're about to put it in the books here. For my man, Ron Fuller. And I remind you one more time, check him out in several spots online. Do not be afraid to reach out to the Tennessee Stud. Perhaps you will be winning a great prize out of the Stud Store, like an autographed picture, as our winner this week has Jason Williard, Little Rock, Arkansas. We had great questions. We had great stories today. I thought it was a great time. I know I had a wonderful time. Again, tnstud.com is the website. Facebook, Ron Fuller, Tennessee Stud. Instagram and Twitter, Ron Fuller Welch. For my tag team partner today, oh hell, I'm not even what am I calling him Ron, you know what I am? Seriously, on this show, I was thinking about it when you mentioned Andre the Giant. All I've got to do is tag you one time, and I can sit over here and play my guitar, man.
Well, hey, one of these episodes, maybe we'll just turn that mic on and we'll listen to a little bit of that. No, you can play behind me.
No, the goal here is to get listeners, not repel them. And on that note, thank you for being with us. Hope you have yourself a great Studly week.
Thanks for joining us today for this historic Studcast. The true story continues next week. So full Nelson your friends and point them in our direction for another ride with the Tennessee Stud.
1, 2, 3.
This is David Summers saying so long from the Great Smoky Mountains.